It is official. Sean Diddy Combs has been sentenced in his federal criminal case. We're going to discuss everything that happened inside that courtroom, including the bombshell decision by the judge.
The courtroom was heavy with tension. A tension so thick that you could feel it pressing down on your chest. A silence so sharp that even the faintest sound carried like thunder. This was not an ordinary trial, not an ordinary sentencing.
Today was the day. After 2 years from when Cassie Ventura Fine filed her lawsuit against Sean Combs, after an investigation, after a raid, after the Cassie tape was published by CNN, after an apology video, after an arrest, after multiple indictments, superseding indictments, after an 8-week trial over the summer, where Sean Diddy Combs was acquitted of racketeering conspiracy and sex trafficking, but convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, namely transporting people across state and international lines for sex work, he was sentenced for his crimes today. Judge Arun Subramanian in federal court in downtown Lower Manhattan sentenced the rap mogul. Just handed down the sentence a few minutes ago at the time of this recording. Now, to be clear, why this is such a big deal, other than the fact that Sean Combs has been sentenced for federal sex crimes, we had no idea what the actual sentence will be. There is no pro forma mandatory sentence here, like a life in prison. It's just a standard. We know what's going to happen. No, there was a range for this judge. The defense was asking for no more than 14 months in prison. And since Sean Combs had already served about 13 months in the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, he essentially would be out in no time if that was the case. The prosecution was asking for 11 years. The probation department that did its own analysis recommended 7 years and 3 months. There was a range. We did not know what the sentence would be. We are going to get into everything that happened today, including what it was like in that courtroom when the sentence was handed down. And to do that, I want to bring back on Queen Elizabeth Milner, Long Crime Zone. She was inside that courtroom not only for today, for every day of this trial. This is the conclusion of quite a saga. Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on. First, I want to start off, how did Sean Combs look? Okay, that was a big question. I know we have courtroom sketches that came out. How did he look? How did he appear? What was his demeanor? We'll talk about the statement he made in court, but just how did he look?
Yeah, well, Jesse, you can imagine how big of today actually was for Sean Combs. I mean, he was going to be learning his fate. And to your point in your intro earlier, we didn't know where that range would really lie. Could it be on the tail end of that being time served and he could possibly leave walking out of the doors? We didn't know if that was going to happen. We didn't know if he was possibly going to get double-digit sentence. So I think the weight of the world you could kind of feel when he walked inside the courtroom today. He was wearing casual clothes, civilian clothes, so he wasn't in his MDC tan jumpsuit or anything like that, like he was at the last hearing that happened just last week. But today he appeared in a tan sweater, white undershirt, dark pants, similar to the looks that he was appearing in during trial. And then when he walked inside the courtroom today, Jesse, he waved at his family. He did kind of like a little prayer hand, but he did seem a little bit nervous. And I think it's possibly because they just didn't know where the sentencing would go. And so he sat at the defense table with his glasses, and then the proceedings began. But you can only imagine what was really going on in his mind as soon as he walked in, saw his family, saw the amount of people inside that courtroom, because Jesse, it was a packed house today, body to body, person to person. There was no seat left unseated today inside that courtroom.
Real quick, talk to me about that. I heard there was 30 people in the front rows that were friends and family of Sean Combs. Anybody notable?
So Jesse, today inside the courtroom, it really was a kind of a little bit of a who's who was in there. I mean, everyone from Janice Combs, Diddy's mother, Keisha Combs, Diddy's sister, Dallas Austin, who was a music producer. He was inside that courtroom today. Sean Combs' children.
And not an ordinary man standing before the judge. This was Sean Diddy Combs, a figure who had once embodied success, wealth, and untouchable power. For decades he moved like a king through the entertainment industry, dictating trends, shaping culture, and building an empire so vast that many believed it could never crumble. Yet here he was, stripped of all illusions, standing in a courtroom as nothing more than a man about to hear the words that would define the rest of his life. The guilty verdict had already landed like a bombshell. Those two words, guilty, guilty, had shattered the image Diddy spent years creating. The jury had spoken, and no amount of influence, no amount of lawyers, and no amount of money could undo what had just been decided. But if the guilty verdict was the crack that broke the dam, the sentencing was the flood that was about to drown him completely. Everyone knew it. The judge knew it. The lawyers knew it. Diddy knew it. And so the room sat in silence, bracing for the impact that was about to come. Diddy sat at the defense table, hunched, trembling.
And that being Jesse and Delilah Combs, the twins. It was Quincy Brown who was there, Justin Combs was there, Christian Combs was there. But I think what was interesting, Jesse, and a notable guest, at least to me, was alleged victim number 3, and that being Gina Hunn. She came inside the courtroom a little bit later than the rest of the family, so she wasn't seated directly beside them. She was seated kind of more towards the back of the courtroom on the defense's side. So we did see her inside that courtroom today, and I think also another notable figure that I learned through this trial was a person named Rue, and that was Ruben, who was one of Sean Combs' security guards. He was inside the overflow courtroom. He didn't make it into the main courtroom, but he was present inside the courthouse. But other notable names that were inside that courtroom today, Jesse, were LaWanda Lane, who is a good friend of Kim Porter, who's also been reportedly taking care of the twins since Sean Combs has been incarcerated. Dana Tran, who is the mother of Sean Combs' youngest daughter, Love, she was inside that courtroom. Sarah Chapman, who is Chance's mother, was inside that courtroom. Misa Hilton, who was Justin's mother, was inside that courtroom. Charlucci, who's been a fixture throughout all of the trial, throughout all of the pretrial hearings even too. One of Sean Combs' very good friends was inside that courtroom. Karen Agnifilo, lead attorney Mark Agnifilo's wife, was there too. And so it really was just kind of a who's who, especially of Sean Combs' family and close friends. But I will say there wasn't any huge, big shocker to your point, Jesse, that she wasn't there, because we thought that she would be inside the courtroom, and we were kind of curious who the government witnesses who would be there to give their final victim impact statements ahead of the judge giving down Sean Combs' sentencing. But today, right off the bat, Christy Slavic, who is a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor, she said Mia no longer wishes to give an impact statement. She had submitted that written statement, and that the tone of the defense letter, I think, was what really kind of changed her mind as to coming into the courtroom today. And I can only imagine probably how Mia feels specifically. She's using a pseudonym even to testify, even as she's writing letters to the court, because of just the fear that she has been getting in terms of what she believed to be backlash, either from Sean Combs or his fans, or even just the attention that it's that the case has brought against her too. And so I was very surprised that she didn't attend court in person today, but I can understand why, because even the judge said to Mark Agnifilo today that the tone of the defense's letter in response to Mia giving a victim impact statement was just completely inappropriate. And it was a pretty harsh letter, Jesse. I'm sure that you've already read it, but it was kind of a very harsh tone, and it was kind of similar a little bit to her cross-examination too.
Now let's talk about the prosecution. So prosecutors today, they outlined their argument in court. It echoed a lot of what their filings were in anticipation of this sentencing. What were some of the key arguments, the themes that stood out today about why they say it was justified for Sean Combs to have a lengthy sentence? Remember, they were asking for 11 years. How did they justify it today? What were the arguments they made in court?
Yeah, well, today, Christy Slavic, making the arguments on behalf of the government, she said that today is about accountability and justice. And she was talking specifically about accountability, Jesse. She was talking about the conduct that was lasting for a 15-year period. I mean, even if you go back to the superseding indictments where it says this conduct went on from 2009 all the way to 2024, that's
a man who no longer looked like the mogul who once walked with swagger. His lawyers, pale and stiff, exchanged nervous glances, their arguments exhausted, their tricks spent. They had fought tooth and nail, but even they knew that at this stage, the power was gone from their hands. The room seemed to close in on him, the walls themselves pressing forward, reminding him that there was no escape. The judge adjusted his glasses and began to speak, his voice cold, stern, deliberate. He spoke of justice, he spoke of accountability, he spoke of the years of arrogance, the years of misconduct, the years of abuse of power that had brought Diddy to this point. Every word felt like a hammer striking against the coffin of his empire. The judge reminded him that no one, no matter how wealthy, no matter how famous, no matter how untouchable they might appear, was above the law. And then came the moment that froze the room and etched itself into history. The sentence.
a long period of time. And so from the government's perspective, they really just wanted accountability from the defendant, that being Sean Combs. And then they also wanted justice, particularly for the victims. I know when we often talk about the Sean Combs case, the Diddy case, the P. Diddy case, he is the focus of this. But I think a lot of people have to remember that there were victims in this case, that being Cassie Ventura, that being Jane, that also kind of also applying to some of the charges that he was acquitted for too, where you can also bring in like Nia and Capricorn Clark and Deontay Nash. And so I think the government from their perspective was really trying to speak on behalf of all of those people. And so today, Christy Slavic, again, she was saying that the law requires the court to know all about the defendant and the defendant's conduct. This isn't just a case about freak-offs and hotel nights. It's about a man who did horrible things to people. He weaponized currency against victims. They were talking about that even though he was convicted just on the Mann Act charges, that it's also kind of in relation to the violence, and that the defendant didn't understand or doesn't understand how harsh his conduct was, and that his respect for the law was just something as simple as lip service. And so, yes, the government was asking for a far steeper penalty and punishment when it came to Sean Combs' sentencing. They were hoping for those double digits, and I think they were kind of opposed to the whole split the baby method, as Christy Slavic said today in court. And so they did want a harsher end of the sentencing today. And I think as far as the judge is concerned and what his ultimate sentence would be, it kind of ended up being a kind of happy medium a little bit.
Yeah, we'll get into that. And the defense, number of defense attorneys spoke. I think almost all of them. You had Xavier Donaldson, you had Brian Steele. What were some of the themes they were focusing on in terms of why Sean Combs deserves a lenient sentence, why 14 months would be appropriate?
Yeah, so right off the bat, Jason Driscoll making the arguments on behalf of the defense, because Jesse, yes, it was Jason Driscoll who spoke. It was Nicole Westmoreland who spoke, Xavier Donaldson who spoke, Mark Agnifilo and Brian Steele. That's 5 of his, 9 defense attorneys who all spoke in court today. So as far as Jason Driscoll is concerned, he was saying that the defense says that Combs didn't make money off of the Mann Act convictions that he was charged. And that was kind of a big theme in terms of his argument today, and that the defense submitted 300 cases of Mann Act cases where it talked about pimps and minors being trafficked, immigrants being transported, homeless people being transported, all of that stuff. And so that was kind of the theme, at least from Jason Driscoll's point of view, and that the defense also saying that Miss Slavic, Christy Slavic, who is one of the federal prosecutors, blamed Mr. Combs for having a drug addiction for 25 years, something that they were also talking about, how he had been addicted to drugs going back at least to 2000. And so a lot of his conduct might be not necessarily excused because of his drug addiction, but they say that might be kind of the underlying reason. And then when you get to Nicole Westmoreland, she was talking about Sean Combs' inspiration and his commitment at MDC Brooklyn, where she was talking about all of his successful businesses. She was talking about how he started a record label from the ground up. She was talking about his clothing line. She was talking about his television company, that being Revolt, and that's where she started to really kind of get emotional, where she was saying that Sean Combs spent a majority of his adult life really trying to help the Black community, really trying to give back to the community, that he isn't this larger than life persona, he's just a man who makes mistakes. When it came to the other defense attorneys speaking, Brian Steele was just very urging of the judge to please consider that Sean Combs had untreated trauma throughout his life. Brian Steele urged the judge to consider that Sean Combs.
When the words left the judge's lips, it was as though the air had been sucked out of the courtroom. The length, the severity, the finality of the sentence was brutal. Years upon years behind bars. Years that would not only rob him of his freedom but strip him of everything he once thought he was. Gasps erupted across the room. Some cried out in shock. Others sat frozen with their mouths hanging open, their brains scrambling to process what had just been said. And then it happened. The mask Diddy had worn his entire career, the mask of confidence, control, and invincibility, shattered before everyone's eyes. He broke, his face crumpled, his shoulders shook, and tears poured down his cheeks. The sobs came next, raw and uncontrollable, echoing through the courtroom in a way that no one could ignore. This was not a man crying in silence, this was a man collapsing. A man destroyed, a man who had finally realized that the empire he built could not save him. The image was haunting. The same man who once stood at the center of million-dollar parties, who once strutted down red carpets dripping in designer suits.
Had untreated trauma in his life, and that there have been times in Sean Combs' life, especially when he had drugs in his system, that there were times where he had flatlined and that he was trying to be a better version of himself. And I feel like, Jesse, that was really the theme of all of what the defense was saying, that these 13 months were really reflective of Sean Combs. He wants to be a better person. He wants to leave the past in the past and be a better person for the future. And so even when it came to Xavier Donaldson, he was speaking about how Sean Combs should receive a just punishment. He brings up intent when he talks about Sean Combs' conviction of the Mann Act charges, and that Sean Combs isn't just a pimp, and that he was talking about his work at MDC Brooklyn, where Xavier Donaldson said, we've had assemblymen and politicians, billionaires in MDC, but nobody besides Sean Combs was there to actually help out the other detainees and the other inmates there. And then finally with Mark Agnifilo, his whole argument was that domestic violence comes with childhood trauma. So I feel like the defense was really kind of trying to pull at the heartstrings a little bit of the judge and even possibly the public too, because this was their final say to all of the people, all of the media coverage that this case has brought attention to. And so I think at the end of the day, from the defense's perspective, they wanted everyone, including the judge, to just look at Sean Combs as a man who made terrible, terrible mistakes, and whether or not he's been punished enough for it, that was kind of what the judge had to consider today.
By the way, I think it was interesting that I think the prosecution said in response that only one of the 5 defense lawyers who spoke actually mentioned the victims. It was very much Sean Combs focused. Now, I say that because Sean Combs did something very interesting when he spoke. He mentioned the victims. We'll get to that in a second. Before we do, I wasn't in that courtroom, but I will tell you, I reading about this, I could feel the emotion that came out when Sean Combs' children provided statements. That felt like a turning point. The judge would later reference the children. Talk to us about who spoke, what they said, and what was it like in that courtroom?
Well, I think it's a moment that a lot of people were anxious to hear, not only from Sean Combs himself, but Sean Combs' children, who, I mean, we do have to admit, Jesse, they have been through a lot throughout the duration of Sean Combs' civil litigations, all the way going into his federal case, too. And so when the Combs children came up for the victim impact statements, they all came up together. They really were showing kind of a solidified, solid unit when they were up at that podium speaking in front of the judge. I will say the only exception of Sean Combs' 7 children was the fact that his 2-year-old daughter Love wasn't there inside the courtroom. So in terms of who was speaking, it was all of them, again, except baby Love. But Quincy spoke first. And so one thing people have to note about Quincy is that Sean Combs isn't his biological dad. Albie Shore actually is. And so, but what Quincy said when he first spoke to the judge, because he was the first one up, he is also the oldest child too, is that he is our father. In front of us, he's a changed man. Week after week, we see him evolve. Our father will never do anything to jeopardize his freedom ever again. Then Justin Combs spoke next. He's the second oldest son. Justin Combs said, please give our father a second chance. This has been the toughest time he's ever been through. This time saved my father's life. I talk to my father every day. He's changed for the better. I ask you to see my father the way I do. Christian Combs was next. And Christian Combs kind of also brought kind of the personality here a little bit too, Jesse, where he says, you know, I'm the one who people say I look the most like my pops. I studied my dad up and down. He's my superhero. He taught me to treat women with respect. So he said the past year I had to travel across the country to see him for 2 hours. He's changed. I see in his eyes as his twin that he's changed. Please give my family grace and please give him mercy. But really, Jesse,
who once declared himself untouchable, was now reduced to tears in front of strangers, his voice cracking as he begged with his eyes for mercy that would never come. The judge did not flinch. The sentence stood. The gavel struck. And with that sound, Sean Diddy Combs' fate was sealed. The cries of his family filled the room. His daughters, visibly shaken, clutched each other in disbelief. His sons sat frozen, their faces a mixture of shock, sorrow, and silent rage. They had grown up in a world where their father was untouchable, untamed, unstoppable, and now they were watching him collapse, reduced to a sobbing prisoner being led away in shackles. The pain on their faces was undeniable, but so too was the realization that nothing could change what had just been decided. As the guards moved toward Diddy, his sobs only grew louder, his hands shook, his body trembled, and his legs seemed to give out beneath him. He begged, quietly at first, then louder, as if pleading with the judge, with the guards, with anyone who would listen, to undo what had just happened. but there was no
where the heartstrings were with the girls, and that was Jesse Combs, Chance Combs, and Delilah Combs who were speaking today. Jesse Combs, who spoke first as far as the daughters go, she broke down immediately when she got up to that podium and started speaking. She said, "We aren't here to excuse his mistakes. We need him in our life. I lost my mom, her mom being Kim Porter, when I was very young. He promised to be there to keep us safe." Then Chance Combs, she had spoke, and she said that we're just his daughters, but we do need our father. When we talk, he speaks with a clear mind. He's more patient. He's thoughtful. He wants to be a better man, a better father. He's parented our 2-year-old sister from jail, and I saw glimpses of our father. Our sister deserves a father who's present to teach her how to ride a bike, to tuck her in at night before she goes to sleep, something that any kid would want. And then the final child who spoke on behalf of the family was Delilah Combs, and she said that we're scared of the thought of not having our mom and our dad in our life. She says that these are the years that we'll never get back. I know that much of the missing years hurt because we have lost our mom. We already lost so much. Please, Your Honor, give our family the chance to heal together, not as a headline, but we're trying to do better. And so I think from just like a human perspective, it was very emotional. I mean, you couldn't help but feel for the children, especially his daughters, because some of his children have lost both parents. But, I was wondering, would their impact statement have any sway on the judge, who I believe that had already made up his mind going into sentencing? And so it was interesting just to hear just the emotional impact of what they've been through before Sean Combs was ultimately sentenced.
I think it did. I think it did have an impact on him. He mentioned something about the children later on. Again, we'll get to that. We're teasing it up because it was significant what the judge said. The judge would end up referencing not only Sean Combs, but the children and the victims too. We'll get to that. All of this was coupled by something I don't think I've seen in a sentencing. There was a video, an 11-minute video that was created by the defense that was played in court. What exactly was this video?
Well, this video, to me, Jesse, I kind of thought was a little bit of a love letter to Sean Combs, whether it was to the judge, whether it was to us in the public. I was kind of curious about where the direction was going, because we did see the video prior to it being shown in court today. So I did get a glimpse of it where I saw bits and pieces of the many accomplishments Sean Combs had. And I think that's one thing that nobody can take away from him, is that he did have incredible accomplishments, such as the record label, the fashion label, the fact that he was starting charter schools in the inner city, the fact that he was trying to raise money, the fact that he was getting more black and brown people in order to vote and do their civic duty, all of that sort. And so I think in terms of just what the video was to show that this is who Sean Combs is, but there were also glimpses of what he's like as a dad. And so there were moments where we saw him and his children together, and this was all of his children, going from his oldest child going to his youngest child, that being his daughter Love. And so we really got to see what it was like for him not to be this quote unquote larger than life person, but really to see what he is like as both him during his career and him as a father. And so it was a very humanizing video. It's about 11 minutes long. It was a very interesting glimpse into his life, kind of post all of the civil litigation, of the federal case, all of that sort. And so some of the even quotes from it was, let's go, and that means to be positive. And so I think that was kind of the theme of this, was just positivity, and just how positive Sean Combs has been to certain people's lives during certain moments of his life.
We got to talk about the big moment. This was the moment we were all waiting for. Sean Combs made a statement.
Doing it. The guilty verdict had spoken, the sentence had been delivered, and there was no power left to bargain with. The courtroom, still reeling from the announcement, sat in stunned silence as the guards lifted Diddy to his feet. Shackles clanged against the floor with each step, the sound reverberating like a cruel reminder that the man who once walked free was now a prisoner forever bound by his own actions. He turned his head one last time toward his family, tears streaming down his face, his mouth trembling as if to speak, but no words came out. The weight of reality was too heavy, too final, too crushing. Outside the courthouse, the world was already reacting. News outlets blasted the sentence across headlines. Social media erupted in chaos, debates raging across every platform. Some celebrated the ruling, declaring it justice long overdue. Others mourned, struggling to reconcile the mogul they once admired with the broken man they had just...
I hate myself right now. I have been stripped down to nothing. I want to apologize to my 7 children. I'm so sorry. You deserve better. To my mother, I feel you taught me better. Sierra, I go to you. As somebody who's been following this case from the beginning, What are you taking away from what he's saying?
I mean, this is a day of reckoning for Sean P. Diddy Combs, and something that we were hypothesizing before we finally were hearing the words that he was saying was that he may in fact point out the victims in this case and apologize. I mean, I believe we talked about that just minutes ago, and here he is doing just that. My question in all of this, I will be very interested to see what Elizabeth Milner says when she comes out, because right now she is in the courthouse, so she is there watching P. Diddy as he's saying these immortal words. I want to know his emotion in all of it. I mean, we can read the words. He's saying, I'm sorry to Cassie, I'm sorry to Jane, I'm sorry to my children and my mother. You taught me better. I threw everything away. I ruined everything. But what is the emotion there? Is it just words? Is he completely stone cold face? Or is he crying? Is he upset? And I think all of these things are something that Judge Arun Subramanian will be clocking, because I mean, that's really what it is. Is he truly sorry? Is he truly remorseful for everything that he's done? I mean, he's now been convicted of a crime here, the transportation to engage in prostitution, which, to your point, Jesse, we haven't heard an apology for all of that. We've heard an apology for the domestic violence side of things. And I mean, I will just guess that Diddy might go on for a bit longer, as it is his first time really to address all of these accounts. But I want to know the emotion behind all of it.
It's a great point, and that's obviously something that Elizabeth Milner would know, because she's inside there. She can hear it for herself. But if we're clocking this, if we're clocking that he's not directly addressing the federal crimes that he was convicted of, you know Judge Subramanian's going to say it too. He says, I let down my community. I wanted to show we could take care of our own problems. I got lost. I'm not this bad person. I'm sorry to my community. I let you all down. People can change. I know I've changed. There is a part about this, Joe, and he goes, sometimes you have to go through life experiences. These are not excuses. I can't change the past, but I can change the future. I beg your honor for mercy to be a father again, to be a son again, a leader in my community again, to get the help I need. Now, Joe, look, we're criticizing parts of this from a legal point of view, from a human point of view. Could the judge be persuaded that this is a guy who's really learned his lesson, that could be a force of good, that he wasn't convicted of racketeering and sex trafficking, that while transportation to engage in prostitution is a serious crime, and there were elements of violence and drugs that were a part of it, and this happened many times, that perhaps he should not have to spend a significant portion of his life now in prison?
Here's what I say, at the risk of coming off like I'm banging on Diddy, and this is not a banging, Diddy day kind of thing for me. But if he's learned his lesson in 14 months, he'll learn it better in 2 or 3 years. And so what that means is there's got to be another reason over and above him learning his lesson. That's part of it. But over and above him learning his lesson, for him to be released more sooner than later. And that could be the force of good that he could be. I don't want to minimize that. I don't want to minimize the fact that he's, he's got ingenuity. He's creative. He has a huge platform. Everybody's going to be watching the things that he does next. And so that would have to be more the reason.
Seen in court. But no matter where anyone stood, the truth was undeniable. The Diddy the world once knew was gone forever. This was not just the fall of a man. This was the collapse of an empire, the businesses, the endorsements, the music legacy, the brand. Everything he had built over decades crumbled in that courtroom when the judge's words cut through the air. Fame could not protect him, money could not shield him, influence could not sway the gavel. His tears, his sobs, his desperation, none of it mattered. The sentence was final. The moment the words hit the air, Diddy broke. His composure collapsed instantly. His eyes filled with tears, his body shook, and his face crumpled under the weight of reality. The man who had once walked like a king now looked like a man completely destroyed. His cries echoed through the courtroom, a haunting sound that revealed just how far he had fallen. Gasps filled the room. Some were shocked at the length of the sentence, others at the sight of Diddy, this man who had always carried himself with power and control, reduced to sobbing in front of the world. His daughters, his sons, his family sat frozen, some in tears themselves, others unable to process what they were witnessing. The empire that Diddy had built was gone, and in its place stood a man whose future would now be defined by prison walls. The judge's gavel struck, but the echoes of that sentence will never fade. Diddy was led away in shackles, tears still streaming down his face, his cries barely muffled as guards escorted him out of the room. That was the moment the illusion ended. That was the moment the man who thought he could escape accountability finally faced the full weight of justice. And so, the story of Sean Diddy Combs took its darkest turn. What began as a journey of success, of influence, of seemingly unstoppable power, has ended with a man in tears, his freedom stripped, his empire destroyed, and his name forever tied to scandal and downfall. The courtroom will be remembered not for the judge's words alone but for the haunting image of a mogul collapsing into sobs as his fate was sealed. Diddy once thought he was untouchable. He once believed that no one could bring him down, but when the gavel struck, when the judge delivered that harsh sentence, when the tears poured down his face for the entire world to see, it became clear that even kings can fall, and when they do, the fall is devastating, brutal, and final. That moment in court was not just the end of a trial, it was the end of an era, the end of the illusion, the end of the empire, and the beginning of a long, harsh reality behind prison walls, where Sean Diddy Combs will no longer be a mogul, no longer be a king, no longer be untouchable. He will simply be another man serving time, haunted by the memory of the life he once had and the sobs that betrayed just how far he has fallen.